Many House of the Dragon viewers agreed that all the time jumps in the first season were a bit difficult to keep a track of, but as it turns out, the show could have started even earlier, leading to some more time jumps and recasts. In today's video, we'll go over some other places in the Fire and Blood timeline that House of the Dragon could have started from. So let's dive right in. First off, the series could have started 40 years before the main story, because the source material for the House of the Dragon isn't a single narrative storyline. Like that of its predecessor, Game of Thrones, the writers weren't sure what the starting point for the prequel should be. House of the Dragon is based on the Fire and Blood books. These are written as a historical account of the Targaryen family and showcase several reigns of kings that have come and gone. There are several Targaryen kings whose reign could have served as the starting point for the series. We know that the prequel ultimately ended up starting with the reign of King Viserys I, but as it turns out, George R.R. Martin had a completely different idea of where the series should begin. According to him, the show could have even started 40 years in the past, telling us the stories of Aemon and Balon. These two are the fathers of Rhaenyra and Viserys, and so we would have likely gotten to see the two grow up as kids and prepare for the roles they assumed later in life. It's safe to say that the premiere episode would have been very different if it started 40 years in the past. George even had a name for the pilot episode. He called it The Heir and the Spare. Next, how different would House of the Dragon be if it started earlier in the timeline? If the show started 40 years in the past, it would have allowed the audiences to learn a lot more about Aemon and Balon. We would have been able to see their friendship and rivalry grow. Plus, the story would have shed a bit more light on Rhaenyra's backstory too. The first episode starts with her grandfather choosing her cousin Viserys over her as his heir. We're never really given too many details on why the king made this decision, other than the fact that Rhaenyra was a woman. But if the story started earlier, we would have been able to gain a deeper understanding of the decision. We would have also gotten to see the death of Balon, and how all of it led to the events of the Great Council. Seeing how hesitant everyone was to Rhaenyra's claims could also help to cement just how hesitant everyone in Westeros was to a queen. This version of the show could have also delved deeper into Targaryen succession and the many customs that are associated with it. The series definitely would have been a lot more focused on the concept of succession itself, instead of simply being about the dance of the dragons. We'd get to see multiple succession disputes occur, first between Balon and Rhaenyra, then Rhaenyra and Viserys, and then finally Rhaenyra and Aegon. Maybe the writers thought all of this would be a bit too much to handle. Plus, this version of the series wouldn't have been without its issues. While it's great to get more content and see more stuff on screen, starting the series 40 years in the past would have had its own fair share of issues. This is probably why the idea was ultimately rejected, despite Martin wanting it to be this way. For one, the story would be filled with tons of flashbacks, even if just the first episode was dedicated to this part of the story. It'd feel incredibly crowded, and if they were to stretch it out, then an entire season could be created covering the plot before even Rhaenyra's birth. The endpoint would probably be the king choosing his heir at the Great Council, which doesn't exactly make for an amazing finale. That said, this history lesson of sorts could have been confined to just 2 or 3 episodes. This would mean that the season could reasonably reach the same place where it ended at currently. But the downside of this is that there would have to be even more time jumps and recasting that needs to be done. This was a problem that was prominent as it is, and so we think it'd definitely get out of hand if we were to add the heir and the spare storyline to the mix. Going with this route would mean that stuff with Rhaenyra and Alicent would have to be rushed, which wouldn't have been great. These two characters are the foundation for the series to come, so it makes sense to have them be the focus. Moving on, what are some other points in the Game of Thrones timeline that the show could have started? Recently, Martin discussed a couple of ideas that could have served as decent starting points for House of the Dragon. While the 40-year flashback was definitely his favorite, it wasn't the only one being discussed at the writer's table. Another possibility was to have it start all the way from the beginning of the Fire and Blood books, with Aegon's conquest of Westeros. Along with his sister's wives, Aegon made his way to Westeros on their dragons, though, with the sheer amount of content that would need to be covered just to reach the Dance of the Dragons, you could probably write an entire 4 to 5 season long TV show. And if it were treated like a small flashback, then it would probably have to be so rushed that it'd probably lose all meaning. Plus, it's not like Aegon's conquest is the start of Targaryen's history anyways. Before even they arrived in Westeros, the Targaryens spent quite a bit of time at Dragonstone. And of course, even before then, they resided in Valyria. If you really want to go all the way back, then it'd mean showing all of these events, which is obviously not possible or needed for a show depicting the Dance of the Dragons. Not to mention, the writers had another, more realistic idea that could have served as the start. While starting all the way from Aegon's conquest is a bit tough to digest, there was another possible starting point in the writers' minds. They thought the show could have begun directly with Queen Aemma's birthing scene. The first shot of the series would be the Queen and her baby's death. This event definitely is what created a crisis for Viserys. It meant the death of his only son and also his wife, whom he loved very much. Though even with this version of the story, there are some issues. Firstly, it would skip the Great Council meeting, which is brought up later in the story. It would also mean that Viserys' troubles with Daemon would have to be set up later on. This is partially what caused him to declare Rhaenyra as his heir, so his decision wouldn't properly make sense to the audience. The show could have also begun right after Viserys' death, which is the end of the 8th episode of the current version. While the show would definitely start from the meat and potatoes, we think the groundwork and foundation for most of the characters would have been lost in the process. Much of the reasons behind why the war was happening just wouldn't make sense to the audience, and everything would have to be explained through flashbacks and exposition, which is never great. Because of all this, we think the show did start at the right point in the timeline. While there were issues with time jumps, those were an inevitability. Finally, Millie Alcock thinks she's done with fantasy roles after House of the Dragon. Even with her limited screen time in the first season of House of the Dragon, Millie managed to become a fan favorite. Her portrayal as the young, rebellious Rhaenyra was pretty much perfect, and it left fans wanting to see more of her in the role. Though, unfortunately, due to the time jumps, it meant she had to be replaced by the equally talented Emma Darcy. If you were hoping to see Millie once again take on the role of a rebellious young princess, you might not be in luck. The actress has stated that she's not doing any more fantasy roles for the foreseeable future. While speaking with the Herald Sun, Alcock made this desire clear and stated that now that she's done it once, she doesn't really want to do it again. Instead, she's waiting for the right project and is not in a hurry to jump into anything too soon. Her decision makes sense. The actress stated that she's still slowly adjusting to her new life after House of the Dragon. She described the series as truly life-changing and that she needed some time to get used to her new level of fame. Though, she mentioned that she knows it's probably temporary and will die down over time. That said, considering how genuinely talented Millie is, we don't think audiences will be forgetting her anytime soon, especially if she graces our screen with more amazing performances in future projects. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on House of the Dragon's timeline? Comment below, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.